Hi there. Everyone was really surprised yesterday when the Writers Guild of America actually voted to go on strike for the first time in 15 years. And I already made a reaction video covering how this won't really affect House of the Dragon Season 2 that much. It might delay filming for reshoots from October to November, which is what they were doing anyway because they were ahead of schedule. We're looking at a summer 2024 release, just as I always thought we were, so that's not really changing things, but more broadly, looking at how will this affect the industry as a whole, because we rely on the TV industry to make World of Westeros content. Just how will this affect everything? So this is a state of the industry video. I saw this amazing article in Variety that broke down how well will each of the major streaming platforms be able to survive a writer's strike if it's comparable in size to the 3-month strike that happened 15 years ago, by rating how much scripted versus unscripted content do they have. That obviously unscripted reality shows are unaffected by this. Scripted content is very much affected by this, and there's also other factors going in there. And I like the logic behind it, and that it made a lot of sense based on what I already knew, just putting it in context. So I want to go down the list, and the moral of the story is they rated it from affected high, medium. Only one was listed as low affected. Warner Discovery, the parent company for HBO Max and everything. So the platform that the World of Westeros franchise is on is the streamer most likely to benefit from the writer's strike. Well, benefit or suffer the least. That, in as many words, it said, just, this is in a perfect position to survive this. If you were to hypothetically describe a streamer in a strong position to survive a writer's strike, it's Warner Discovery with HBO Max and everything. Good news for us. This is good news for us, but I'm just going to run down the list of the 7 or so major streaming platforms, which ones would be worse affected and why. I'm going to start with the high affected and get down to Warner Discovery at the end. And they put charts and things in this. I'll go through that. The one thing is they had these bar graphs showing how much scripted versus unscripted content do each of these streamers have. By raw number of shows, not by viewership. I wish they had given it by viewership. That is a more accurate thing, because like one episode of The Mandalorian, one Mandalorian-type show, or Yellow Jackets or something, makes up disproportionately more of your viewership than a dozen reality shows. That the whole point of reality shows is you have a lot of them, they don't have a big profit margin, but they're cheap to make. I'm working with what I have. I have the raw number of scripted versus unscripted shows. Yes, the scripted shows are disproportionately watched more, but working with what we got here. First off, Disney Plus. They would be badly affected by this. That Variety lists them as high. They're one of the big games in town. Obviously, the leading companies would be affected the worst because they have the most to lose. But another issue is, of the big 7 or so, some of these are pure streaming. Some of them are media conglomerates that have multiple branches. That they said they will be hurt by this. But they also own Hulu, they also own various other Fox things like FX, FXX, ABC. So if you combine the streaming with the cable stuff, they can move shows from their more obscure branches, like Hulu and FX, to Disney Plus. They can, if they're running out of shows next fall, they can put FX shows that were like on FXX Plus or something onto cable TV to pick up the slack, to cushion the blow. So they would be hammered by this pretty hard, but there's things they can do. Paramount is pretty much in the same situation, just they're smaller and can't afford as much to weather this. But same thing, that they have different branches. That they have a cable channel, they have Paramount, but they never bundled Paramount with some of the other streamers they have. They just bundled it with Showtime Plus like a few months ago. With the Yellow Jacket Season 2, people were actually watching it because it wasn't on some obscure streamer. That they didn't bundle other things they have. Like, I know BET Plus, they never bundled with it. The idea was, and there was like Nog and a few other things, they didn't bundle them because they wanted to sell them, but that never went through, so they still have them. So, kind of like how Disney has a couple of branches, and a cable channel, Paramount has cable stuff, there's things they can do, that they can shift around some of their more obscure content and run it in place of, we don't have a fall lineup on cable or something, that there's a pretty good chance they're going to run Yellow Jackets on cable TV, on CBS, because of this. And as an erstwhile new show that, well, it's a rerun to them, or the Star Trek franchise. Picard Season 3, Strange New Worlds, might get runs on cable TV if they have no other content to put out. Because they're on the streamer, not everyone has the streamer, and it would at least, it's a rerun, it's boosting exposure for Paramount Plus when it comes back. That there's such a thing as the expression, you were dealt a bad hand but played it well. That they're not just sitting around in a state of shock. There's things Disney can do. To a lesser extent, there's things Paramount can do to, okay, I can shuffle them around my resources in such a way. We'll put Yellow Jackets on cable. We'll put some of the better lead BET Plus shows on a different night. We'll put Star Trek on the other night. There's things they can do and strategies that are not just sitting around waiting to die. Obviously, Paramount doesn't have as much money. We'll see if they can weather this. And a lot of people haven't seen Paramount Plus. That's a blessing in disguise when your streamer is one of the smaller ones that people haven't seen Yellow Jackets compared to everyone saw Mandalorian. That might work in reverse. The last of the ones that Variety listed as would be high level of effect from this strike is Apple TV. Unlike the other two who got a bad hand but had options to play it well, they're just sitting around being terrified. More than any other streamer, Apple TV will lose from this strike. They have nothing else to do. They don't have other branches. There's Hulu, well, there's Showtime Plus. They don't have other branches. They don't have a cable channel. Everything they have is just the Apple TV streaming service. And on top of that, relative to other streaming services, they have a very high proportion of scripted content. And I'll talk about that more at the end of this, as I went through by proportion. They have very little unscripted content, and they have nothing to pull from anywhere else. There is no counter strategy for them. More than anyone else, Apple TV will be hammered by this. We're looking at the end of Apple TV in this writer's strike. Not definitely, but it's a non-zero possibility that this could be a blow they don't recover from. So they're officially affected the worst, Apple. Then the ones that are medium affected, this is interesting. Amazon wouldn't be as affected because of the churn is when people subscribe on a monthly basis, then leave when there aren't any new shows. They think a lot of people are going to unsubscribe if there isn't a new show on a monthly basis. Amazon isn't really affected by the churn that much because their subscription is bundled with their shipping service. They're long-term subscriptions, so a 3-month disturbance wouldn't really cause them to lose that many subscribers from their TV service. So they have a moderate number of scripted shows, not enough that they're really so invested like Disney that losing the scripted shows would hurt them, but the shipping service subscriptions will moderate that from people just fleeing. Interesting, though, even though they don't have cable channels or other branches to pull from, that Disney does, but they'd still be highly affected because they have so many scripted things. Amazon might not have other things to pull back on, but it does have that shipping service. Netflix, though. Netflix, Variety listed as medium because it's the only truly global streaming service. That Disney and Amazon were only just starting to do this, where they see it as a global market. And they actually pioneered, we're going to take shows from around the world and put them in the algorithm and suggest to people with English subtitles, to the point that they become hits in the United States and the UK and stuff. I mean, can Disney really say it ever had an international hit subtitled like Squid Game, Money Heist, or those German shows like Dark in 1899? Internationally, the Writers Guild of America affects America-based shows like the Game of Thrones franchises in HBO production, it's co-production, but other stuff like from Europe, like Germany, or from Asia, Korea stuff, Spain, Money Heist, will not be affected by the Writers Guild of America strike. So Variety listed them as medium impact because they actually do have a decent number of unscripted shows. They don't have other branches to pull from, they don't have a cable channel to pull things on, but they can weather this by just switching to emphasizing their international content. They're already in the process of doing that, and no other streamer has really been able to do that. I can't think of like an international Disney Plus hit. So they're in a moderate position here. And of course, NBC, Universal, and Peacock are so laughably uninvested in scripted content that they're also listed as medium. That Peacock has nothing. Peacock is mostly a rerun service for old scripted content from the NBC library, which is, really coveted content, but it's still not new stuff affected by a strike. It's, I want to see old NBC shows, is why people are mostly getting Peacock. Meanwhile, NBC, the cable channel, has almost fully converted into being unscripted content anyway, because that's what cable TV is good for now. Unscripted reality show type stuff. So when you look at the numbers, the number of things that NBC puts out as a proportion on the cable channel that's unscripted is really high. Peacock doesn't have that many new scripted shows. It's a rerun thing. So because they're not really playing the new scripted content game, they don't have much to lose. So they're rated as medium. Last we get to Warner Discovery. This is the only one on the list that they put as low. Well, low to medium is the way they phrased it. The specific quote is, Warner Brothers Discovery is perfectly placed to ride out a content shutdown. End quote. That you couldn't have imagined something better. That 3 weeks to the day before they were going to launch a new merged platform between HBO Max and Discovery Plus, this happened. Discovery Plus, which is the biggest unscripted content library out there, that's how Discovery Plus was doing so well financially, even though it was the 8th largest streaming service. It wasn't like Disney or even Netflix, that it was mostly unscripted reality stuff that doesn't, drama scripts and things, and not just, wildlife, but also, house flipping, interior things, construction, all sorts of things, that it was a niche that others weren't filling. So there really was, all the articles I've read about David Zaslav over the months, they really didn't overlap that much with the other bigger streamer providers. That's why it was able to thrive. So 3 weeks before their giant merged platform launch with the biggest unscripted library there is, it said this in Variety. Of the combined HBO Max Discovery platform Max, scripted content only accounts for 7% of their total titles. Granted, that's by raw number of shows, not by viewership, like I said before. By viewership, obviously, like the House of the Dragons of the world, or the Successions of it are going to be bigger. But in terms of raw number of titles they have, only 7% are scripted. And it says 7% are scripted, half of that is from HBO. Because Discovery has a lot of things, but the rest are like TBS things, Cartoon Network things, and stuff. They're the only streaming service that actually has more unscripted than scripted content by raw number of titles. And there was one or two outliers they mentioned. They said, this isn't a streaming thing. AMC, they listed as medium because they said they only put out one new show at a time per season. They're the home of Breaking Bad and Mad Men and Better Call Saul. All of those ended. Walking Dead ended. Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire was very good, but because they're only really putting out one, it's an indie thing, it puts out one big new show per TV season, They can bounce back after a three month writer's strike, losing. If there's nothing out by like next fall season, they'll just double up in spring for all their backlog content and all be well. So AMC isn't really playing the game, therefore they're not losing that much. But of the big streamers that are really affecting things, Warner Discovery will be top dog after this. Well, it was middle of the pack. There were the big three were Disney, Amazon, and Netflix. And then there were the also-rans at the bottom, like Paramount and Peacock, and then in the middle was Warner Discovery going, we think we can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps to actually be top tier. We started behind. But Amazon is run by idiots. Netflix is making stupid decisions. We are the smart ones actually with grit and determination trying to fight our way up the ranks, and we're going to stick through this. And admittedly, they're smarter than Netflix and Amazon are, because they're doing terrible. It's the things we hear about what's going on at Amazon, that they're just throwing money at problems. That I think we wouldn't see it as this exclusive top 3 anymore, but top 4. That divide won't exist anymore. That you will actually start mentioning Max alongside Disney Plus and Netflix as a major respected platform, that after their growing pains. That Warner Discovery has the most to gain from this, not my words. The Variety article said this is the only one we're putting at low risk, because they have the most to gain from this. The serendipity is the word. Serendipity of 3 weeks before a merged thing with the biggest unscripted provider there is. Conversely, the one that's going to be hammered the most is Apple TV. They have no survival plan. I don't think Apple TV will... There's now a strong chance it won't exist in 2 years. If Apple decides that it's not worth it... Apple's already running it at a loss. It's supposed to promote... Buy our Apple devices to run the included... Like when you have a game, the included game in a platform... It's just to have some content included in it, and they might just decide it's not worth doing anymore as a promotional strategy. Everyone else has a counter strategy to deal with this crisis of the strike and no scripted content. That Netflix has global content in a way the other ones never really were able to develop. Disney and Paramount are both more of a family of services with different branches, different sub-streamers, that they could cycle in content from their more obscure stuff like Hulu or Showtime Plus, put it on their cable channels, and give some more exposure to Yellow Jackets or something. Disney could do that too with other Hulu content, FX content. That's a strategy. Amazon, it's a shipping service, so it tends to be relatively stable. Peacock isn't that much of a player to begin with. Apple TV has no counter strategy whatsoever. The exact quote that Variety gave was a blunt, quote, Apple TV Plus will be smacked hard by this writer's strike. Period. End quote. That was all they had to say about it. There was nothing they can do. Now what I then did was, because they provided all this detail about this is how many scripted versus unscripted things they're doing, I calculated the percentages here, and again, this is purely by number of titles, not viewership, and admittedly it's a little inaccurate, based on these 7 major streaming platforms, how are they going to survive this is how much unscripted content do you have as a proportion of total content. To start with, like Amazon, it's a straightforward, I did it as a percentage, I added them up, 38% of their content titles are unscripted, because Amazon is a pure streaming service. Some of these I had to make up 2 numbers from both pure streaming and, if you count up every scripted versus unscripted show in their library, including their cable channels and even their broadcast channels, like if you include the Disney Family Channel plus ABC into the whole Disney catalog that they could draw from and shuffle around. So some of these I came up with 2 numbers. Amazon, like I said, is 38% unscripted. Netflix is comparable. They're about 36% unscripted content, but much of their scripted content is internationals, like the Squid Games and 1899s of the world and Money Heist. They're doing even better than Amazon on that front. So most of these, the rough average I've noticed is about a third unscripted is normal. Disney, meanwhile, Disney Plus itself is 34% streaming. Again, the mid-30s you're looking at. But the trend I've noticed for this and other things like NBC that also have cable is cable TV is mostly unscripted these days. It's mostly reality shows. If you count up the chart that Variety gave of every scripted versus unscripted thing in the family of channels that Disney owns, that proportion rises to 48% unscripted content. That they could cycle around, move things around. Okay, this was an unscripted show that was obscure on Disney Plus. Let's move it to something else, or they can work that out. Paramount Plus is loosely comparable to Disney in that respect, that they have CBS as their broadcast thing, they have some cable channels, they have streaming. Purely on their streaming on Paramount Plus, about 40% is unscripted. Factoring in all those other things, 54%. So that's a little higher than what Disney is doing, but still basically in that range of what I would think is normal and healthy. NBC Peacock is even higher, like I said, that Peacock itself is 44% unscripted. And if you factor in how much NBC is unscripted these days, it rises to 67%, that it wouldn't really affect them. Apple, however, which is just Apple, they don't have other channels to draw from, is 23% unscripted. That everything else is in the mid-30s to mid-40s. They're at 23%. Only 12 out of 51 titles are unscripted at Apple. It is the lowest out of the 7. Whereas Warner Discovery, purely based on their streaming platform, is 71% unscripted, including all the Discovery Plus stuff that's coming in. And when you factor in all the TV channels they own, like Discovery Channel, like TBS, which also does a lot of unscripted stuff, actually, that rises to 85% unscripted content that they could cycle around in a writer's strike. So out of all of these, head and shoulders above the rest, like 30% above, 20% above anything else, by number of titles of unscripted content is Warner Discovery. And by the numbers, Apple is well below the rough average for everything else in terms of it's mostly just a scripted content streaming service with no other branches to fall back on or cycle through or anything. I think we're looking at the end of Apple TV Plus. Unfortunately, it might also really hurt Paramount Plus to the point they really have to sell it now, that we thought it was going to sell in the next 2 years. That even if Paramount does everything right, and they do have a decent content library, they might just not have the funds to survive this, even if they play their hand well, do everything right, put Yellow Jackets and Star Wars on CBS broadcast, it might not be enough. Which is bad. That there's things they can do versus that we have a strategy versus we're sitting around just waiting for the inevitable like Apple. So that's where things stand now. Just looking at the numbers in stark relief, Warner Discovery is going to be top dog after this. They will emerge from this stronger than ever. Netflix was already running into problems. Amazon was already running into problems. Disney, relative to its size, that you're going to have some problems when you're that big. There's going to be some stupid decisions along with the great ones because you're the biggest game in town. But the Netflix, Amazon, and Disney hit the subscriber ceiling, which is in the low 200... between 200 and 220 million subscribers globally, that when Netflix lost subscribers for the first time ever last spring. Whereas Warner Discovery said, we hope to get 130 million subscribers by 2025. And that was before this writer's strike hit. That they are the one that's actually growing and thriving and coming back from the brink and pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. The comparison I liked using for HBO Max is they're the scrappy, determined one that knows what they're doing and knows they have few resources when it's going to come from behind. So in Game of Thrones terms, I said HBO Max is basically Stannis. that he starts out in the worst position, but he's a good commander, so he knows what he's doing, so he can play a bad hand well, versus then you have the Joffrey or Renly or the Greyjoys of the world who are just idiots who do not have a plan. And or like Netflix, I compared to Rob Stark in that, like, it had a lot of early success, thought the good times would never end, then got overconfident, and then exhausted their resources. And spread themselves too thin based on early success where they seemed like they couldn't lose. Whereas the Stannises of the world, like the Warner Discovery, knew it was coming from behind, knew they needed to play it smart, and gradually has been building up HBO Max, whereas, you know, there's going to be competition with Disney no matter who is in charge. And they are changing plans at Disney now, but Netflix and Amazon are run by morons. Cindy Holland was the real brains at Netflix, and they forced her out. Who knows what the hell they're doing now at Netflix, whatever golden goose they're going to kill now. So I don't know. But I've been rambling here. I'm sorry, I've been making videos on this all day, that this is the state of the industry, that Warner Discovery will benefit the most from this writer's strike. Apple TV might not exist because of this writer's strike in another year. Please like and subscribe. I try to cover industry news when I can, because it's the broader aspect of industry things that affect what content gets made for us.